All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I appreciate your time being here. We know that time is your greatest asset. We appreciate the opportunity to share this time with you. We are looking forward to the conversation today. I'm Nicole Lyons from Jorgensen Learning Center, and I'm joined by my colleagues Julie Wise and Dr. Ray Jorgensen. As I mentioned, we're part of the Jorgensen Learning Center, and our team is a team of learning professionals that is committed to supporting leaders to enhance the quality of their everyday leadership conversations, relationships, and results. We have a special guest today that is with us, a JLC client and Director of Curriculum and Instruction for STEM Education for the Upper Merion Area School District. Please join us in welcoming Sean Gardner. We appreciate you being with us today in conversation. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is the Zoom webinar platform, and there are a lot of different ways that you can connect with us during the call. One is the Q&A feature. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen. There's a little conversation bubbles. You can ask a question anytime during the session, and we'll respond to you either live or in the chat. And then there's also the chat feature where you can talk to each other, you can talk to us, you can talk to the whole group. So we encourage you to be active in the conversation space so that we can hear your voices and we can respond to you and answer any thoughts that come up for you or any questions that come up for you. And with that, I will turn it over to Ray.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Appreciate you being here today, everyone who's listening in. And we're very grateful to have Sean here with us today. And I thought I'd take an extra second or two and let Sean give you a little bit of his background. And the reason why he's here is that he has worked with Julie, and he heard some old man talk to him about 5 years ago about the way you could actually hold meetings differently and interactions. And since then, he's been interested in the work and, in his own words, a fan of the work. And he has chosen to do one of the things that we invite people to do when they decide to use our practices, and to recognize that disciplined practice produces growth, not permanence. It produces growth. And we are an infinite company. We don't think we ever stop learning. I know I certainly am still in that big space of learning. So without further ado, Sean, a little bit about you and your background and what brought you to us.
Thank you, Ray. So I'm Dr. Sean Gardner. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction for STEM Education for the Upper Merion Area School District. I've been in central office for the better part of about 13 years now. Saw Ray about 5 years ago, as he mentioned, and really enjoyed his workshop, as experiential as it was, and modeling throughout the workshop what we did. And I started using a few of his techniques and saw immediate growth in my meetings. Used that over the past 5 years, and then started to see effectiveness and growth to a level that I hadn't seen before, but I felt like I peaked and I needed some help, honestly. And that's why I reached out to the Jorgensen Learning Center for an executive coach, and that was Julie Wise, who's been fantastic over this past year. And it's similar to in our K through 12 education, when we talk with our students, you can only take yourself so far, and then you need a teacher or a coach to take you kind of to that next level. And just over this past year, especially being a year with COVID, super challenging year, trying to meet our teachers and students where they are and our families where they are. This work has been invaluable to focus our work where our time is our most valuable resource. And we're trying to get a lot done in, say, a 45-minute meeting. And it's been, again, invaluable. And I'll use that word throughout our time today. Just been super focused, super effective, super positive. And our teachers and administrators have responded in a way that even we didn't see possible, thanks to the disciplined work that you talked about, Ray, and using just a few simple techniques. And I don't mean simple that it's necessarily easy, but it is not something that takes a whole change of your entire meeting structure, but rather a few tweaks to it that are intentional, and the amazing things will happen. So I'm here to share that. So thank you very much.
There's a piece here that you mentioned. These practices are maybe not necessarily simple or simplistic, but they're very commonsensical. And as we all know, in this world that we live in right now, common sense is not commonly practiced. And we have a whole year of watching lots of interesting practices that sometimes, as we sat and watched and listened, we scratched our heads. Okay, so how do we really take what are truly commonsensical disciplines and turn them into daily practice? Well, this seminar, ladies and gentlemen, those of you that are listening, is really about Sean and Julie. And I'll let Julie set the context about how this relationship developed. And it probably won't surprise you to know that in the best conversational leadership coaching environments, people that begin as acquaintances and kind of interest in each other turn into true colleagues over time. And I certainly believe that's the case for Sean and Julie. So Julie, how about give us a little bit of your intervention that you produced with Sean and how that was most readily seen in the meeting structure?
Sure. Thanks, Ray. So we offer at JLC a free discovery call with our coaches, me being one of them. And it just gives you an opportunity to get a sense or a feel for what it would be like to have a coach. And that's what Sean did. Sean reached out and said, "Hey, I'm interested in this. I've been listening to your podcasts, but I think I'd like to just see what it would be like to have a coach." And he had nothing to lose other than 30 minutes of his time. And after he did it, he and I were like, "Oh my gosh, this is so great." I am not an individual worker. I'm a team player. And I love working with someone else and collaborating because two minds together are just amazing. And through whatever he was having questions for and through my experience, we came together and really found a way to target maybe what was the one thing or two things, because we only meet for an hour. So you can't go and, change everything about, your school district or your meetings or your businesses. So you really focus in on one or two things. And then he's able to go and try them, experiment with them, and then come back, let me know how they went. We can tweak again. And it's sort of like this layered approach where you just continue to build and build and build on what you're able to implement.
Sean, how does that land on you?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it with Julie. And I think that's what's so valuable about this, similar to our own meeting structures where we don't have a lot of time. Meeting with Julie is an hour. We go through things. We use the protocols that you model and this team models. And then from that, I try it out and then we meet again the next month or 2 weeks later. In the beginning, we did about every 2 weeks and then we did once a month and just reflect back on it, share what worked and what didn't work, and then further fine tune it for the next meeting and then try again. So it's truly a learning process and that learning loop throughout the time.
I like that from both of you. This sensibility about there is a loop involved where we're going to do something and then there'll be a shift. Nicole, did you have something to add?
No, I think it's just really beautiful to have the conversation about how these conversations start and happen. It is a practice. And I think it can be overwhelming to people to think, oh, I want to change my meetings or I want to do something differently and I have to do it all at once. And that's really not the case. I think what you're hearing Julie and Sean talk about is that it's a partnership that occurs over time. And there are little things that you can implement that make a really big difference. And then you practice them until they feel comfortable and they feel like you.
Yeah, that's really important that it feels like you when you do this. And we have a colleague on our team who for her first years with us tried to use similar phrases and language that I used, and she just kept hating herself for it and hating me for it at the same time. And eventually she began to just articulate all of the work in her own voice. So this has to become real. And something that Nicole and I have experienced in working with a different client, but a client in the private sector, a Fortune 50 client, their leaders would say, this felt very clunky when I first started doing it, felt a little bit off. And then as soon as I kept doing it, they started to expect it. In fact, one group asked this one leader, aren't we checking in today? Because they hurried through the beginning of the agenda. And like, wait a minute, well, I'm supposed to check in. So those that you work with, those that you have the privilege of leading, those that are in your care, will notice right away the differences and give you a chance to embellish your practices and keep them alive. So great opening, guys. Let's do this now. Julie, talk about what were the first things that you and Sean worked on, and I'd love him to react to that because we're here to talk about a meeting makeover. How do we create a meeting? Like we all have meetings, right? We all have them. And this is an opportunity to say, how do I refine this practice so that I like it better, and so do the people in the room with me like it better? So you're all set to go, Joel. How did you start?
Well, it's always whatever the client brings, first of all. And if I think back, I feel like, Sean, that's actually where you started. How do you make a check-in meaningful? And, because you had tried them for 5 years and now you knew that, okay, we really needed to get focused. So I said, okay, so we want to talk about check-ins. So tell me a little bit about your meeting. What is your purpose? Why are you having a meeting? What do you hope to have as an end result of the meeting? And you need to really think about those 3 questions for your check-in. You don't just pick a check-in. You craft and design a check-in that really starts off the meeting to activate that schema and that background knowledge and that experience in those that are meeting so that they can bring their best thinking forward. And then you do a checkout at the end of the meeting so that it all sort of wraps around and transitions that information from your short-term memory to your long-term memory and puts you into action. So I think that's really where we started. And so, Sean, what do you remember from when we started?
Yeah, that's it, Julie. I'd been doing a check-in for a few years based on the work that I'd seen with Ray. But it was a lot of the touchy-feely check-ins, right? It was to get everyone's voice in the room, and I completely practiced that. But I didn't feel like I was getting my bang for the buck in the check-in. It was rather just a rote kind of let's go around. How are you doing today? Or tell me one thing. And there wasn't any intentionality to it. And then we talked about it, Julie, and you sent me a document with the 4 different reasons and intentional kind of purposes behind each type of check-in with cues and check-in examples that I could use, which really, again, get back to that intentionality of what do I want to start the meeting with? Is it just to feel good, or is it to set the table for the meeting? Is it to prime people to think in a certain way? And then closing the loop, I've started using that phrase a lot with our teams around the checkout as well. And that's been one of the hardest things for me to do in pacing a meeting, which I think whether you're in your first year running meetings or your 50th year running meetings, pacing a meeting is one of the most difficult things. And really understanding the value of the checkout, being intentional about it. In a 1-hour meeting the other day with about 12 people in the meeting, and I stopped 20 minutes before the end of the meeting to do the checkout because I'd set up an intentional checkout around what they felt that they got out of the meeting. Like and I used the term, what surprised you in this meeting? And really allocated the appropriate amount of space for that. And then through that, I was able to check for learning, check for understanding, and make sure that we were all on the same page moving forward with the goal coming out of that meeting. So I think that intentionality was big. The prompts that you shared with me, and really putting in the planning work to treat the check-in and check-out just as important and just as valuable as the content part of the meeting, which I hadn't done before.
How's that resonating with you, Julie?
So I'm excited to hear that the prompts are helpful. Ray often says, if anybody ever has worked with Ray will say, well, the check-in just comes in the moment. And for those of us who are just starting, it's always good. Yes, the check-in can come, or the close the loop can come in the moment. But at the same time, it's nice to see a couple different options. And it sounds like you understood a little bit deeper about this process of checking in, closing the loop, and checkout. Nicole?
Yeah,
I'll go right to your comment. I don't want to be Yoda. Therefore, it is important that as Nicole gives us a couple of queries, you two give us examples of the intentional check-ins that you did. And I assume it's connected to the meeting content. Nicole, what are people saying?
And that's exactly the question. We just got a great question from one of our participants. What are the 4 reasons for intentional check-ins? Or the 4 kind of categories of types of check-ins you can do.
Love it. Okay. Sean and Julie, keep your mics off mute, both of you, and talk to each other. What are those 4 things?
Yeah, so I can start, Julie, if you want. So the first one was to identify possible distractions on the minds of the participants. So some of those, what is your attention right now? What's distracting you? How will you stay focused? Ray, one that you shared with us 5 years, or shared with me throughout the workshop 5 years ago, was how much of you is here and how much of you is at the door. Just recognizing that people have things going on outside. And I see that in the chat right there. Everyone has something going on. Yeah, just recognizing that up front and giving the space for people to share. So that was the first one. Second one was to set the lesson's intentions and acknowledge the commitment it took to attend the lesson. So some of those, what did it take for you to be here today? What would make this lesson most valuable for you today? Just on that one, I used that one with a team of 6 teachers that I worked with. And they said it was the first time in their career, one of our teachers who's been teaching 25 years, they'd ever been asked in a meeting what they wanted to get out of the meeting. First time ever.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's
And then
pivot too. It's like, if this time you spend with us in this meeting is valuable, what would you get out of it? What would be a takeaway? What would be where you'd walk out in the corridor and say, that was a great meeting. This is not hard, ladies and gentlemen that are listening, but it requires that preparation so that you can make that provocation real and let it unfold. Thank you, Sean. Please continue.
Yeah, no, Ray, thank you. And that was where the intentionality of closing the loop as well came in, because then I backed that up with the close the loop in that meeting to say, what did you get out, what you wanted to get out of this meeting? And if you didn't, what would you like to get out moving forward? And then that person felt, again, to use your words, right, deeply heard and understood, right? Because the meeting was about them and not about me necessarily with it. The third one is the check-in to provide a space to consider the outcome for the lesson. So share one effort that you're focused on to enhance for our world, to enhance your instruction. Biggest training gap right now when we are talking about professional development, what is on your mind in the area of professional development. And then the final one, the fourth, is that icebreaker to connect and develop relationships. So I just used that one the other day, working with a group of 7 teachers. We're in the summer coming out of a COVID year. And it was simply just share one bright spot from your summer so far, and right away you saw that, like, the shoulders went back, the smiles on the faces, right? And that was for a full day workshop. So we were 6 hours together, in and out, with, again, opening, starting and then closing that loop in different modules of that 6 hours to then make it really intentional with it. So those would be the 4 areas. Julie?
Yeah, Jules?
I would just say something that both of you touched on is one of the great things about having an executive coach is you are giving yourself a solid hour of undistractable time to really think deeply. And I think that was one of the things, again, with the check-ins, oftentimes you're running from one meeting to another. And so as you're walking down the hall, you're hoping nobody interrupts you because you're planning the meeting as you're walking down the hall to the next meeting. And when you set an hour time and you're intentional, oftentimes Sean would show up and say, I don't have anything for you today. And I'm like, okay, so what's going on? What does your week look like? How was last week? And within us talking, sometimes it wasn't anything that he had planned. As we were talking, we were discovering areas and planning his agenda much more deeply than he originally had intended.
Nice.
And let me just say, just to piggyback on that, Ray, yeah, Julia, to the audience out there, the hour of executive coaching then springboarded into creating a habit for me of allocating an hour of my time to plan meetings, which I hadn't done before. Like Julie said, I would, quickly put something together before the meeting, or if I did put some time together, it'd be 15 or 20 minutes just around a purpose for the meeting, but nothing as concrete as the context, purpose, outcome either. But through that work, I then gave myself permission to allocate that time in my day to plan for the meeting. So that was super valuable.
But Julie, what is context, purpose, and outcome? What does that mean?
So that's how you can create a purpose or create a focus for your meeting. And it really helps you validate or align the agenda items that are in your meeting. Oftentimes when I work with C-suite or administrators, there are a zillion ideas or agenda items that they need to deal with. And so I try, when I work with them during a coaching session, is creating a context, purpose, outcome. So the context is, why are we even having this meeting? Do we need to have a meeting, or are we just having a meeting just because we always have a meeting? And who's attending the meeting, and how long is the meeting? And So that context really gets us clear on that. And then the purpose is, what do you want people to learn or understand from the meeting? We don't just want to have a meeting to disseminate information. You could do that through email. You could do that through a recorded video. You could do that through face-to-face conversations. But if you're pulling a group of people together that are like-minded and really smart, you want to use that time to make sure that everyone is really learning from each other or understanding a complex problem that's out there. And then the final thing is the outcome. And what is it that you want them to do differently as a result of the meeting? And once you get those three questions really clear, then you can say, well, this agenda item doesn't fit. And this agenda, oh, I can send that as an email. And all of a sudden, this 3-page agenda becomes a really focused 3 or 4 agenda items that all link together, and you can really have deep conversations.
No, that's beautiful, beautiful. Did you have another question, Nicole?
We do have another question, and it is related to the check-in. So after you've delivered that CPO, a check-in has the potential to discover someone's personal resistance to being there. How does this not become a major upfront distraction if they verbalize it?
So what would you guys say?
I can share. I've had this happen, and I had it. I've now tried to craft sometimes the check-ins away from it. The one thing I'll say is through the modeling that I've seen, and if you're not listening to the podcast, I'd highly recommend that, because you can start to see the patterns evolving in the podcast because you model what you preach. So through that and through these webinars and through the work with Julie, I've seen it's the check-in's not a discussion, right? The check-in is rather, I affirm and say thank you. When a check-in, and when someone has pushed back a little bit, and one of the topics Julie and I worked on around diversity, equity, inclusion is a really controversial topic that we were talking about. And we crafted the check-in a way to make it more personal and did not touch the controversial topic in the check-in, but rather our check-in when we did it was about their own experience when a teacher meant well, and then it kind of went sideways for them, and what that was like as a student. Then once they shared that, and a few shared some things I could tell they were not, because they'd already seen the CPO and we'd gone over, they're not in the meeting. I just affirmed, said, thank you so much for sharing that. That is a wonderful story. And then I call on the next person. So I think that's the other shift as well, is calling on people for the check-in. So allowing them space to think about their answer and then going around the room. And once we build in that routine, even the people who have pushed back on a check-in, I affirm, move to the next person, and then we keep going. And then the hope is by the checkout, when we close that loop, that we have now persuaded them in some way to be on our team with what we're doing. And I've seen that happen, honestly. Does that capture it?
I think what I'm hearing you say is that you have a couple of ways to check in, and what you've chosen to do is simply be grateful that they shared, they chose to share. And in your design, you attempted to stay away from some things that may be controversial. And then at the end of that, you move to the next person. We make sure we heard that person, move to the next person. Did I get you right there, Sean?
Yeah, that's it, right.
That's what I just modeled, this very simple process. Here's the simple process. For those that are listening, it is ACRR. 1, acknowledge what the person said. 2, C, confirm that you understood them properly, that you didn't miss something, that there wasn't something else they wanted you to get. The next one, respond. And the last one, respectfully. Acknowledge, confirm, respond respectfully. If we do that, even when someone is like struggling with something, it feels very different, because what people really want more than anything else is to be seen as significant in the meeting. It is one of our fundamental human needs, is to be seen as significant. And the more you, and I would say to everyone listening, and to myself, I say this all the time, the heart of the work lives around acknowledgement and respectful response. There's just nothing more powerful than that in terms of building safe space. Because even if I may not agree with you, if I confirm that I understood you, and then respond respectfully, that's an opportunity for me to offer a different point of view. If I don't do it, if I simply say, no, Sean, that's bullshit. Wait a minute, let me tell you what to do. All of a sudden, we just changed the entire thing. It became a tit for tat. I'm now in almost a debate or a discussion, not a conversation. And at a later time, we are going to talk about those distinctions between debate, discussion, and conversation. They aren't the same. And what you just laid out was just beautiful, Sean. I think the people listening are thinking, how do we do this and make sure it's okay? And there's always that fear, will we touch something that's very, very, a hot potato? Well, yeah, we might. We might. That's real. That's authentic. That is part of the work. And your check-in, the way you described it, was beautiful. Julie, something to add to this little piece here?
I have so much to add, but I will try and stick to two things. So first of all, I am one who is not happy with change. I will tell you that I am usually the one when we do something new or something and I am pushing back and I am not happy about it. But everybody at my clients that I work with, we want that conversation in the meeting. That's where we want to hear who's on board and who's not. We don't want a room where everybody says, yeah, this sounds great. I love your idea. And then you leave the meeting and then that's when the meeting really happens. And then you have these conversations, you think everyone's on board and they're not. So if you have people in your meetings pushing back, first of all, I would say celebrate that you've created a safe space. With that being said, I've been in many meetings where there are people who sit on their throne and they think this is a great time for them to disagree with whatever happens, and the meeting totally goes down a rabbit hole. If that's what you're asking and having a question for, I would suggest possibly setting a timer so that they still have time to give that different perspective, but it's limited. They don't go on and on and on for 10 minutes and everyone's just sitting there rolling their eyes, which I have seen. So there are some ways to make sure you create that safe space, allow people to push back, acknowledge their ideas and thank them for being there, because we need to hear those different perspectives. That's what innovation is about, being able to hold space for differences. And then also limit it so that it doesn't take the whole meeting.
Yeah, respect, trust, and collaboration. That's what we're always after. And I remember listening to Simon Sinek do a talk, and he started off with, I really wish I wasn't needed, because I would hope that by this time, trust and collaboration were part of our day-to-day work, but I guess not. So I guess here we go. So here I have some things to say to you. I thought that was magnificent. And at some level, contextually, that helps everyone that's listening to Simon think, where am I creating spaces where trust, respect, and collaboration really are unfolding? And what Sean and Julie are describing to you are simple processes that build safe space, which is the heart of vulnerability, trust, respect, and collaboration. It's just beautiful. Let's keep going a little bit. So we did a little bit about planning the meeting and a little bit about starting the meeting with a check-in. Talk to me a little bit more about what you took from your conversations with Julie, Sean, that helped you build the heart of the inside of the meeting.
Yeah, so the first piece was the context, using the context, purpose, outcome. I had not used context with our meetings. I had always started right with the purpose of the meeting. And without laying out, when you talk about Simon Sinek, right, start with the why. And just laying out the context. One, in the planning helped me narrow my focus down of why are we even having this meeting? And then two, sharing that and being open with the group that I'm meeting with. Like, this is the reason we're here. This is the reason we're meeting for 45 minutes before we even talk about the purpose or the outcome for it. When I diagrammed out my purpose, as many of you, if you haven't done this, it is quite the exercise. You start to realize when you take your agenda, and then, because most of us create the agenda first, right? And then we go back and what's our purpose? You start realizing, this was my work with Julie, that I saw I had about 8 different purposes for the same meeting, and the meeting was 45 minutes long, right? So look great on an agenda, but with 8 different purposes, there was no way that it was going to be a successful meeting when I saw that on paper, as far as what I wanted people to take out of it. And that's really, Julie talked about this earlier, where you can take pieces and say, I can email people this, or sometimes it's an individual follow-up and I just am saying it to the whole group when I don't need to for it. So the purpose really narrowed down that lens to where I had one focus. And then the outcome, as Julie said, was what is going to happen as a result of this meeting? Like, what is the one thing that I'd like everyone to do to change? And that gives in a more macro sense of closing the loop for the next meeting that sets that table for the check-in. And I've done that where I meet monthly with certain groups of teachers. We leave the meeting with what is the one instructional strategy that you're going to use between now and our next meeting, right? And you have 3 or 4 to choose from. Then the next meeting we come in and we start with the check-in. How did that instructional strategy go? You know, what worked, what didn't work. So that outcome of, again, I hadn't done that before. My summaries were more on the psychology side. Let's summarize everything we went through so that you remember what we went over in this meeting, but there's no action coming out of the meeting. So just by putting that action piece in, we now had something visible, something intentional, and something where people felt supported. That also gave me as a leader an opportunity to support people, because then I can follow up with them between meetings and just say, hey, how's it going? Do you need any help? Do you need any resources? Do you need any coaching? Do you need, you know, what's happening? Do you need someone just to listen? And that's the other thing, just a side note, we practice based on, again, 5 years ago, when I listen to our teachers and our team members, I give them the space. A lot of times I say the only thing I'm going to use to respond is tell me more, or I don't understand, because I'm here to listen to you and I'm here to support you. So I think all of those pieces have really, and the CPO, the context, purpose, outcome, has really helped the intentional meetings.
Yeah, stay there for a second, everybody listening. So those 2 prompts that Sean just shared, tell me more. God, I cannot tell you how that has helped all of us in this practice by simply saying to somebody, tell me a little more about that. I'm not completely understanding what's underneath those words. The person that you say that to immediately feels seen and heard and respected and digs in and said, let me tell you, and I'll tell you more. The second that he gave you was, I don't understand. Tell me more and I don't understand are 2 magnificent statements that will bring from the person you're interacting with a deeper and more complete response. Because, you know, we're all busy, we all want to move forward, and we will stay at the superficial level as long as we need to, so we can move to the next thing rather than drop back down to the next space. That was great. Julie, what are you thinking right now?
After we do the CPO, then I think a couple things that Sean discovered was, as a leader, he felt like he had to have all the answers going into the meeting, and he had to be the one who was telling everybody and this and that. And so that's the next part, right, where you surface and clear obstacles. And one of the ones that I can remember is they were having to make a schedule for the state testing, and they had kids remote learning, they had kids in school, they had like all of these all over, like it was a huge complex thing. And I said, well, why don't you ask them? And he was like, what? I could ask them? and so that was sort of like the next thing. It was like, so what do you think? And turn and talk. And it doesn't have to just be one person talking and then one person talking and you have this sort of round robin thing. You can have them turn and talk to partners. You can put them in triads. You could put them in groups of 4 and then have them report out. So you're still using the same exact time, but they're hearing different voices and ideas from everyone when you do the pairs, the 3s or the 4s.
Sean, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I just used that in the 6-hour work that we did the other day, and really just set the table. Once I set the context, purpose, and outcome, then we ran 45 minutes to an hour, 5 different modules within that time. And in each one, I set the intention, and then the outcome was laser-like in one group that we were looking at, and then we switched the group. And at the end of the day, the checkout was, what surprised you about today? And the teacher said, I came in thinking you were going to present to us, you were going to show us what we had to do, and it wasn't like that at all. And it was amazing. We were able to go down our own paths to create what we wanted to create, and then to share back with you what the product was. And after, when I was debriefing and reflecting with my partner, she said, well, didn't they realize you just had them do all the work for you? And I said, well, yeah, but it's more than that. It's collaborative. And really that gets everyone as an equal weight around the table when you use that approach that Julie suggested to me. And it's been super effective. And then it's my job after the meeting to summarize everything and to share out. So they can see the product of their work. But it's really getting all the voices at the table and having them have input on it.
Yeah, I am very, very struck by the two of you and how much you've accomplished together. This space of tapping into collective wisdom is almost not taught in Leadership 101. And the models that are probably 100 years old now are all about you move up in leadership, you move up in the hierarchy when you know more than these other people, so that if they ask you a question, you can answer them. I've actually had leaders call me before a meeting and say, I need to know what you're going to teach them because I need to know it before they do. I'm like, okay, are you sure? And the second part of that that I thought was really interesting, the ability to broker a resource is a fundamental leadership capability. And sometimes we don't recognize how important that is. And the resources are sitting in the room. Here they are. They're all right in front of us. They all know stuff and they know great stuff. And they have personal, practical knowledge about how to do things well. So this has been magnificent, you two. Let me we did a good job with before, did a fine job with during, creating a CPO for each of the agenda items. And then you alluded to synthesizing the meeting, writing down a few things, right, Sean? And then what are some other things you do after the meeting? What would you say?
Yeah, so the big piece also is through the executive coaching with Julie is giving myself permission to reflect and to allocate that time after the meeting. All too often I would build my schedule, and probably like many of us on the screen, we, for the most part, build our own schedules. So what we end up doing is meeting, lunch, maybe, I should say maybe lunch, meeting, right? And never building in that reflection time. So what I started doing in my own calendar was setting meetings about 15 to 30 minutes apart. Usually now I'm at about 30 minutes apart. So I allow myself 30 minutes to take a deep breath, reflect, jot down a few notes based on that meeting, a couple things to do for it. And then also say, going into my next meeting, what am I going to do differently going into this meeting based on what I just learned from this previous meeting? That was hard because that wasn't hard. What was hard was redoing my calendar and then also saying to other people, no, I can't meet today. What does your calendar look like tomorrow, the next day? Where before that, I was very much a giver and just fitting everything in and shortchanging everyone in the process. So I think that's what I've learned through the executive coaching with Julie is I really shortchanged the teams that I worked with by not taking the appropriate amount of time to reflect on the meeting, to learn from the meeting, and then to move forward into the next meeting to make it better.
Julie, please respond to that. That's magnificent, that outcome that you produce with Sean.
Yeah, and it's just been so fantastic to work with Sean because he does go and do that reflection piece really well, and thinking about what can I do differently to continue to be more effective and efficient. But also in our executive coaching, and he talked about the calendar. I'm a huge calendar fan of dates. And so if in your meeting, I always say, okay, so if this is your outcome, what's the due date? What's the follow-up? Where are those dates? And then it was like, and when's the next meeting so that you can follow up, and blah, blah, and we would put those dates in his calendar so that there was momentum to those successes that he was getting in the meeting versus, and I think, Sean, that's sort of what you're talking about as well. Not only just the reflection piece, but also honoring, I need to make sure I get the stuff done that I said I was going to do before I go and have another meeting. And so taking time to say, when is the due date? When is the follow-up? When is the reflection piece? Putting those in the calendar were very helpful as well.
Yeah, and just to add one other thing that Ray, you had suggested years ago, and we all read in leadership books, and Julie had reinforced this for me, is the power of a thank you note. And I think many of us want to write thank you notes and always have the best intentions to write thank you notes. We don't allocate that time. And I found at certain points that 30 minutes after a meeting, I would take 5 to 10 minutes and write a few thank you notes and put them in the inner office mail to team members that we worked with. And the response was resoundingly positive of how amazing it was, but I'd never allocated the time to do that. And part of that is, Julie, what you're talking about also, if I start with laying out my calendar and assigning those dates, that's less stress for me because then I know that's already there. I know what I need to do. So that opened up time to then say, let me write a thank you note or two and just put it in the mail because I know I've allocated the appropriate amount of time.
Well, Julie and Nicole should be smiling at me because I certainly attempt to do that, not often enough, but I do that. And still, and I will tell you, my best couple of years as a high school principal was when I took the time that summer to write a little note to every one of the teachers. And then it would fall apart often. And I continued to try to do that throughout the course of the year. So that's just incredible, wonderful, wonderful coaching. Thank you. Thank you. Final thoughts from you guys before I shift to a question or two and a close out. Anything, Julie?
I'm just grateful that Sean took the risk to meet with me because time is valuable. And when you think of meeting with a coach, or oftentimes we think, I should know this, like I shouldn't have to ask for a coach. And that actually, we think about the Olympics are coming up. All of them have coaches. Why? Because they want to be the best of the best. So even if things are going really well for you and you're really happy with your meetings, why not try a discovery call for 30 minutes with one of us for free, just to see what it would be like, to see if it could make your meetings even more effective.
No, that's wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Sean, final thoughts.
Yeah, I think the opportunity to allow yourself to receive coaching is possibly one of the most valuable things you can do. We decided in my district to reallocate some money that I would normally use to go to conferences to do this executive coaching. And after going through it for the first year, we're going to continue, but I would recommend to everyone to really look at how you can possibly have a zero sum on your budget, but really allocate it for your own sake to have your own development, because I think that's the other piece. As you climb higher and higher, it becomes lonelier and lonelier. You know, you have less people to bounce ideas off of, you have less people to talk with, and you have less people who are outside of your organization who can give you insights. And that's where Julie's been so valuable for me. I have an amazing director of humanities that's my colleague and partner, and we work a lot together, but we're very insulated in what we do because we're there. So bringing Julie in from an outside perspective with a skill set that can help support me as a leader has been invaluable. So I would say do it for yourself, and really you deserve it. And it is amazing the benefits you'll see from your teams and your meetings overnight if you're open to trying these things.
Yeah, you just described what vulnerability looks like in practice. And I absolutely love Brene Brown. I love the idea that in order for me to really improve, I need to be vulnerable enough that I can let something new in, even change. I can let that in if I need to, right? So beautiful. Nicole, any questions or themes we need to talk about before I do a closeout?
No, I think we're good. I think we've had some great comments come through in the chat where we're talking about how, you know, reflection is such an important part of the work. And someone had mentioned we don't often give ourselves that permission to reflect and to build it into our day, as Sean did. So I think that was really, really wonderful comment and point. And someone just mentioned the investment mindset versus the expense mindset. And I always like to think about it like, what will this cost you if you don't? There is a cost either way. So
yeah, no, that's beautiful.
And Ray, I'm sorry, just if I can jump in on Nicole and the investment piece, just to everybody out there who's attending this webinar, in almost 13 years of central office and running, I don't even know how many meetings, this is the first time in this past year in COVID, when everyone's highly stressed and time was more valuable than ever, that I've had principals and teachers say to me at the end of the meeting in the checkout, when I asked what surprised you, they said, I cannot believe how much we got done in such a short amount of time. Like that to me, and that is from this coaching and this executive coaching and Julie's work with me to get to that point. So it is, when you talk about investment, Nicole, and the person who shared that, it is well worth the investment, because you will reap the benefits on the outcome and the product from your teams 10 to 100-fold.
Fantastic. That is fantastic. Well, this will be very brief. Can you put that slide up on the meetings again for me? And then I'm going to pivot right to you. So the slide is going to demonstrate what we think really matters. So you got a meeting design before the meeting. Make sure you need to have the meeting. You already heard that stated a couple of times. Sometimes just because it's scheduled doesn't mean you have to meet. Here's my litmus test. If you start trying to figure out what to put on the agenda, tell everybody to have a nice time. Okay, that's just like, it's no reason to bring them all into the meeting. And then plus all the other great stuff that you got from Sean and Julie. During the facilitation, be sure that you practice the 4-step process. Create focus and intention, surface and clear obstacles to the best of your ability. And the clearing of an obstacle is a personal behavior. It's not your responsibility. Many times I'll say during a check-in, what's distracting you and what are you doing about it so that you can put yourself back in a space of learning. Finally, common understanding, absolutely critical. And the final thing, generate committed actions. And I would say to you, we have kind of a few little things we say to one another in our team, our JLC team, and that the definition of a professional is someone who makes a promise and keeps it in the best interest of their peers and colleagues and clients. That's a big piece, guys. So meeting design, meeting facilitation, follow up, make sure that you as the leader are holding up the mirror, just to not to judge how they did it, but to find out how did it go? How did your promises work out? And when you check in at the next meeting, it's a great opportunity to say, this is what I did and how it worked out. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Let me pivot to Nicole, who's going to talk about the meeting makeover.
Yes, there are many ways that you all can engage with all of us here at JLC. One of those ways is a link that you'll see in the chat. I invite each and every one of you to enter our meeting makeover giveaway. We are giving away the service that Julie and Sean just demonstrated and talked about during this call today. So one lucky organization will have the opportunity to work with a JLC coach to do a complete evaluation of their meeting with an observation, and then a complete rework and transformation of that meeting agenda. So that could be your regular weekly meetings. It could be a planning meeting or an executive offsite that you've got coming up this fall. We'd love to engage with you and work with you in that space. So please, everyone out there, we would love to have you enter that contest and love to have you win that contest or that giveaway. But that is just one of the ways that you can engage with us. Sean mentioned our podcast. You can go to gojlc.com and you can have access to our podcast, all of the recordings of these webinars, as we mentioned, as well as links that I put in the chat to our complimentary discovery call and coaching session that Julie talked about. So yeah, check out those links, go to the website, and we would love to connect and engage with you.
Go JLC. Thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And we really do look forward to connecting with you personally and professionally down the road. Be well, everyone.